GDLS Canada, an industry leader dedicated to supporting our customers and the community.
Timothy Robinson Murdoch, and my nickname as a coach was Coach, but my nickname as a player was actually Murder. I'm 59 years old. I was born on June 10th, 1962 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I live in Westmount, Quebec, nearby suburb of Montreal. I'm a dual US and Canadian citizen. I'm proud to say that I picked the right century to live in Canada. I was exposed to the game at a young age in Baltimore, Maryland, where I played informally in the street, but I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and I played lacrosse through high school and at Princeton University in the 1970s and 80s in central New Jersey. On the American side, my father and his family are from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my mother and her family are from the New England area, primarily Connecticut and Rhode Island. I married a French-Canadian woman named Pascale Lemaire, and we live here with our two children, Maxime and Liliane. So Maxime got involved with lacrosse at a young age here, around the age of 7, playing box lacrosse. And then he started playing field lacrosse in the Westmount youth program, which I started in our neighborhood in Montreal in around 2006. So he played the game both here in this area, but also in the United States in the summers with a tri-state lacrosse program down in the US. He went on to graduate from IMG Academy on a lacrosse scholarship, came to McGill. He played at McGill for 5 years at McGill University. And he was one of the team captains in a very strong era of our program. For the past 20 years, I've been running my own management consulting practice, and I've sat on several boards of directors and advisory boards of Canadian and US companies. One of my neighbors, Chris Feiss, he played lacrosse in the neighborhood with the traditional wind sticks, and we would just play around in his neighborhood. I don't recall it. I didn't have a stick. I just would pick up lacrosse with other Baltimore kids in the neighborhood. I bought my first stick, I guess I was 11 years old in New Jersey. At the time, New Jersey lacrosse was a bit of an outlier as a sport. It wasn't that popular yet. But no, I picked up the stick and it was a great feeling. I never felt anything like the cradle, and learning how to play was memorable. Well, my high school coach was a man named Bob Kruger. He unfortunately died an untimely death, and he had a real passion for the game, and he loved the game so much. That was the era of the screaming coach, right? If you weren't screaming, you weren't coaching. So I was coached by a lot of guys that screamed an awful lot. It doesn't work. I started off trying to coach screaming at the guys at McGill, and it'll work short term, but long term it's not healthy for the coach. It's distracting. So I tried to adapt my style to yell less and try to stay more calm on the sidelines. I was recruited primarily for football coming out of high school in New Jersey, but I lost the passion for football late in the high school years, and I really loved lacrosse. So the Princeton coach named Mike Hanna allowed me to try out as a walk-on. I made the Princeton team as a freshman. I was definitely one of the least skilled players on that team, but I was athletic enough to progress, and eventually I was a starter on the Princeton team by my third year, playing 4 years there. Probably a great moment was as our team, when I was at Princeton University, we were playing the Naval Academy, and I believe we were losing 8-1 or something. They were nationally ranked, they hadn't lost. And at the time, Jerry Schmidt was our coach, and we weren't playing well at all. We were pretty good. He came into the locker room at halftime, he threw one of those old metal med kits at one of our attackmen. It exploded, and he left, and it lit a fire under our team, and we ended up winning the game 13-12 in overtime. So it was just this very emotional, monumental comeback. And for anyone who's played lacrosse, I think we've all been in these comebacks, but that particular comeback was special because we bumped off an undefeated team down by 7 or 8 goals at halftime. We stormed back to win. It was very emotional. I was pursuing my MBA at Harvard, and they had a men's club team. I got involved with that. We changed the eligibility to allow any graduate students at Harvard to play for the Harvard physical team when our record went from kind of 2-6 to 7-1 pretty quickly. We actually opened the door to all the graduate students, and there's some very good. I'd say the starting lineup of the Harvard physical team were all former Division I athletes, so we had some pretty good team. All things considered, playing club lacrosse at Harvard. Good question. I moved to Los Angeles, and I played in a very informal club league out there called Malibu Lacrosse Club. That was fun, but it wasn't very serious. It was just kind of a way to keep a stick in my hand. And then when I moved to Montreal, actually in 1992, I disconnected from the game for a decade. There wasn't really any men's lacrosse here. The game wasn't really around at all. And it was only through an internet search that I discovered McGill University actually had a club program. That's how I got involved at McGill in 2002. I moved here in 1992 to Montreal. There's a whole decade where I wasn't involved playing or coaching. And then 10 years later, I discovered that that McGill University had a new club program that had just gotten started in 2002. I showed up to play the first practice, and when I realized I was one of the better players, I knew we had a lot of work to do. So they quickly saw me as a coach, and I got involved transitioning them from a club type program to a pretty serious varsity team. The CUFLA was established in 1985, so I think it's in its 37th year. It's a really well-run league. We were really proud to be members of the CUFLA. And the CUFLA allows for NLL players to play as long as they're full-time students. That really elevates the overall caliber of that league in Canada when you have usually about a dozen NLL players on various rosters. Unfortunately, we haven't had enough on the McGill rosters, but we're working on that slowly. Technically, no. Actually, there was a gentleman named Sasha Anand who did the work to get into the CUFLA. I came on board in 2003 in the second year in the CUFLA, and I helped the team. The team had never won a game and they had no money, so I kind of built up all the infrastructure that was required to perform at a higher level. We started recruiting, we started fundraising, and eventually we started winning games, and we became quite effective both recruiting and fundraising, and that led to some success. Well, I'd say the biggest leap came in 2007 when we were lucky enough to get Sean Steinwald, as a former Cornell great, to join as an assistant coach. I was so lucky to have him get on board. He really transformed the program in terms of his ability to bring a lot of his knowledge to the game, formalize a lot of our structures, offensive, defense. And I don't think it's any coincidence that our team really started to take off when Steinwald showed up in 2007. He stuck with us for a while, but he was an assistant coach for, I want to say, 5 or 6 years, and then he stayed involved as a scout for us for several years. He had a young family with kids, and he wasn't able to put the time in, but he helped us win our first championship in 2012, and then he was around as a scout in 2015 when we won our second championship when our team went undefeated. So he's a huge asset, whether or not he was coaching or scouting. CUFLA Coaching Staff of the Year, yes, and that was quite an honor. They usually give that to the most improved program, the team that kind of transitioned from being ordinary to being exceptional. I think that was the year we did that. We had the more diverse the roster became, the more success we enjoyed. So I think that was a real key to our success, was diversity, geographic, national. We broadened our thinking around recruiting to cover all of Canada, all of the United States, eventually Australia. Most recently, we have the first player from Europe. And extremely important, we also saw the opportunity to attract academically talented Indigenous student athletes to McGill. Now, McGill University was lucky that the Canadian Lacrosse Foundation decided to host major celebration on campus in 2017. And working with Jim Calder and the team at CLF, it was determined we could have a nice legacy from this event. It sparked an opportunity to create an Indigenous lacrosse scholarship. So the Canadian Lacrosse Foundation Indigenous Lacrosse Scholarship at McGill was established shortly after the event, and we raised over $100,000 to endow that scholarship, which still exists. So we're really excited about not just the symbolism of that, but the effort that went into establish that, and it quickly resulted in a larger number of Indigenous athletes who were attracted to McGill. We had, in the last year I coached in 2019, we had 5 Indigenous student athletes on a roster of 45, or about 11% of the roster. So we're looking to expand that. My personal goal was always to have 1/3 Indigenous student athletes, 1/3 Canadian, and 1/3 United States. I think that would be a pretty damn good team if you could pull that all together. That's what I think the new coach, Nick Sabria, is aspiring to do. That was really a surprise and quite an honor. I believe that they recognize what we had done collectively, and I, of course, am the leader of the team, so I get all the credit. Not always fair to give one guy the credit, but you also get the blame when things don't go so well. So I was really honored to receive that award from McGill University, and I'll always cherish it. It represents, I think, their recognition of a non-McGill alum, a non-McGill person who's having an impact on the McGill campus. That was a really interesting experience. Quebec Lacrosse has traditionally not been as strong as some of the other provinces, namely Ontario, BC, and Alberta. But we put together a solid group of U19 field lacrosse players. And again, I really believe in diverse rosters. So we had members of the Ganawagi community. About 1/3 of the team was from Ganawagi. About 1/3 from kind of the French Canadian school systems, and a third from the traditional Anglophone systems, both box and field lacrosse. Let's just say that I think we carved out a few wins. We had more losses than wins, but it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. The Griffiths Trophy is awarded to the best run varsity team at McGill, and our team won that for several years in a row. It's really to honor the program in terms of its organization and its success, both on and off the playing field. And I believe McGill noticed that we had brought a lot of pride. We had a lot of pride in what we were doing. We were winning quite often, and we had a well-run organization that was able to perform at a high level in the CUFLA. I guess it was be honest with you, it was a real awakening for me. Even though I had played lacrosse in the United States, I wasn't so aware of the rich history of the game that goes back thousands of years. And so when I arrived at McGill, I learned a lot from people like Jamie Kirby and Ganawagi. We had some early games between Ganawagi's men's senior team. I had an opportunity to speak with Mohawk elder Billy Two Rivers, who talked about the cycle of the game and the importance of mixing the teams. So it is still an ongoing education. I'm just learning. But what really struck me, Jim, was for the celebration at McGill, there was a real awakening, if you could call it that, whereby I learned that the Hochelaga Rock, and we discussed this, was hidden under a tree on the main McGill campus. So there was a lot of advocacy we supported to relocate that Hochelaga Rock to a more prominent position. So that rock now sits directly across from the statue at McGill. So that event, which you'll remember, we had replica sticks from the late 1800s. We had members of the Ganawagi community representing the Indigenous community, and we had members of the McGill lacrosse team, including players and coaches, to represent the traditional late 19th century Montreal Athletic Association team. The whole magic of that weekend really made me reflect quite a bit, and consequently, when we were looking at a legacy project with the Canadian Lacrosse Foundation, it made sense to set up an Indigenous scholarship. So I'm still learning as we go here. It's an honor to be coaching the modern version of the game, but there's so much still to learn. I'm looking forward to learning more. The McGill men's teams have been known as the Red Men, and that name originally was derived from the red socks worn by the Scottish rugby players, or there were this red men, and there were no women, of course, at McGill. And then there was an era, unfortunately, where the name was associated with the Indigenous community. So it's quite controversial. I personally was in favor of a name change. I did recognize some of the arguments for the other side, but given that we had several Indigenous student athletes on our team, I didn't think it was right to have that name. And in consulting with, I'd say about half our team was in favor of a name change and half was not. And like any conversation, there was learning that occurred in that conversation. So we had representation on the name change committee in Cougar Kirby, who was a recent graduate at McGill, and they decided to go with a new name, the Red Birds. But like anything, it's good to re-examine where we are in time, and I think that name was just out of sync with the times. I wasn't very skilled in lacrosse. I was a pretty good football player, and I guess I just worked really hard to elevate my skills over 4 years. I was lucky to have had some excellent coaches. Mike Hanna, who was my first coach, who gave me a shot at joining the team, and then Hall of Famer, the late Jerry Schmidt, who coached me for 3 seasons. Jerry Schmidt used to just tell me, I ended up playing defense, and he just wanted me to make sure that whenever they were celebrating goals, they weren't standing up. So I was kind of responsible for knocking down the goal scorers or making sure that they weren't celebrating, I guess. So it was a much more physical game back then, where a good football player could leave his mark on the field. He noticed that I was good at knocking guys around in practice, and one day he called me into his office. I was a sophomore, and he said, "How would you feel about playing defense?" And I said, "Let's give it a try." So that worked out okay. That's a great question. I think I was in that transition from wood to plastic, because in fact, the first stick I had a wooden shaft but a plastic head, and then quickly the wooden shaft became an aluminum shaft. We still use linseed oil to soften up the leather pockets, but I was in that transitional time in the late 70s when, by the time I got to Princeton, we were using the heavier aluminum shafts, heavy plastic, but the sticks now are a lot higher quality, lighter weight, easier to use, easier to manipulate. But no, I was in the transition over to the plastic sticks and the aluminum shaft. I would say that's a tough question. There were a lot of great moments, but I would say in 2008, we had a huge win over Brock University. At the time, they had never missed being in a national championship. We came in as the underdogs. And it was my 5th year coaching. We came in probably as 10-goal underdogs or something, and we ended up beating this really talented team. So it was a really important moment for our program to knock off the perennial power at that time in an important game in a quarterfinal of a national championship tournament. But they had more talent and more depth. We just outplayed them, and amazingly, we had 0 penalties in that game. I'll tell you what, when I was a freshman, we were playing Johns Hopkins, and they were the dominant team. They were the national champions, I think, that year. And anyway, we were losing pretty badly. I got thrown in. I was in the 3rd midfield, and I got thrown into a game against Johns Hopkins. And I was quite surprised to be in the game in the first place. We were getting killed. Jerry Schmidt sent us in. And I frankly don't remember the name of the player, but I remember the moment quite well. I was ball watching. The ball went behind the net, and they passed the ball to the guy I was guarding. He was a 6'4" All-American, and I didn't even have time to look at him and see him collect the ball. He was already celebrating his goal. So sometimes the negative memories stick out as much as the positives. No, but there isn't really any specific player that stands up. But that moment stood out. It was a real wake-up call to being outmatched and being thrown into a game and not being ready, really. That was quite a memory. That's an interesting question. I've coached over 220 people. I would have to say Sachin Anand would be someone I'll remember, because he was the person that started the program. He was the person that was both a player and a coach and an organizer. And he did a phenomenal job of relaunching lacrosse. Lacrosse was played at McGill in the late 1800s, but Sachin Anand, I'd have to mention him. We retired his jersey number 17. He had done so much for the team. He was there for 5 years. And then it's hard not to forget Jishan Sharples from Vancouver. He scored an important goal for us in the national championship in overtime against Western University. It's quite ironic because I recruited Jishan and his other choice was Western University. So to see him score the winning goal against Western was phenomenal. Now, Western's kind of had our number lately. They're an incredible lacrosse program, but he would be another person that would come to mind. And then more recently, I recruited a young man named Isaiah Storm Cree, and he's really an interesting young man. He won the Torton Award for leadership and excellence in lacrosse out of North America. And unfortunately, he injured his MCL his first year at McGill. And for the last 2 years, we haven't been playing during the pandemic. So he represents the future, I think, of the program and the potential of where it could go from here. But there have been so many amazing players. It's hard to really. Those are three that come to mind here. It's hard to think about there are many great players I could mention. I wouldn't say it was hard. It was interesting. It was a unique experience because I had coached him previously before he arrived at McGill. I coached him on Team Quebec, and I coached him in the Westmount program. It wasn't that difficult to coach him. He's a good player, so I knew he had the skills to be on the field at all times. It was enjoyable. It was really a luxury and a lot of fun to be sharing my final 5 years with the team with him. Having him on our team. I really enjoyed the process of taking something from nothing or from very humble roots with no money and having never won anything and trying to build something meaningful. I also really credit a lot of the success to McGill University, the athletic department, supporting our program through thick and thin. It was a team effort, really, I must say. Getting amazing coaches along the way. Our current coach, Nick Sabri, is a really gifted athlete and a great coach. So it's a collection of people, really. Sticking with it for so long, it was enjoyable because we always had a new challenge. And once we won a championship, it's tough to stay at that level and continue to win championships. That's any strong team can tell you that. Any league between youth and professional would tell you this. So, no, I just love the game. Love the university I'm associated with at McGill University. And also enjoy watching the progress of the young men coming in as young 18-year-olds, graduating, going on, getting jobs, having children, and moving along in life. So that whole progression is very interesting to me, to follow their progression once they've left the campus. I mean, I'm really lucky to have gone to Princeton University. Princeton is phenomenal. Well, first of all, it's an incredibly challenging place academically, athletically. But they have an incredible alumni network. And a lot of the modeling I've done at McGill is, I use Princeton as my model in terms of the importance of sticking together once you've graduated, having meaningful connections throughout life that were spawned on the campus through your sport. And I certainly think I've tried to create kind of a Princeton-like alumni atmosphere for our McGill lacrosse alumni. As far as some of the traditions, in keeping with the idea that this is the creator's game and the indigenous game, we started working with the stick maker Travis Gabriel from Ganasatagi, and Travis builds beautiful wooden sticks. And so I decided to carry forward a tradition that actually came from Jerry Schmidt at Princeton, where all the graduates were given a traditional wooden stick. So all the 4-year graduates from McGill University who play lacrosse, they'll receive a traditional wooden stick as a symbol of that time they spent, but also to remind them of the importance of this game that goes way beyond McGill's campus. This is a stick that I was given after I graduated from Princeton University. We were all given miniature sticks, traditional wooden stick. It says, Princeton Lacrosse, 1984, Tim Murdoch. Yes. So I'm proud of that involvement with Princeton. This stick was made by Travis Gabriel. He's become a friend. Yeah. Travis makes beautiful sticks. I have the original stick that he presented to me at home that I have from him, but what's neat about the stick that I learned from Travis is that each stick is a little bit different. Each stick is carved from a different tree, but it's such an organic, beautiful representation of the game that I guess you could say I've become a stick collector. And then 2 other sticks I'd like to share. One stick was, I believe this is a Great Lakes stick. The game was played quite differently. Would this be, I think, an Ojibwe style stick? So this was given to me at the 150th of Lacrosse at McGill for the work that I did to promote that event. And I find it really interesting. I have this over my desk at home to kind of remind me that not only is the game go back thousands of years, but there's so much nuance and differences among the various nations that were played this game and how the game was played through time. So that's another stick that I'd like to show. Last but not least, this is a replica of a late 1800s stick. This is the type of stick that I believe would have been used by the Montreal Amateur Athletic Club, by the Ganawagi men's teams. I actually purchased this stick to promote the Indigenous Lacrosse Fund at McGill that was set up with the Canadian Lacrosse Foundation. So I'm proud to have that stick. I'm not sure I'd like to play with it. It looks like it'd be very difficult to play with. But that is, it's quite interesting when you look at these sticks and you see the difference in size and scale, and you get a sense that this game has not only been played forever, but it's been played in many different ways for quite some time. The game means a lot to me, and however, when I moved to Canada, there were 2 things that opened that I realized I knew nothing about. One was box lacrosse, and 2 was the importance of the Indigenous history of the game. So when you blend all of those things together, you realize you have a lot to learn. The styles are different, the histories are different, the personalities are different. But I think a blending is going to be really interesting. And I'm really excited about the 6s format of the game that the Olympics seem to be adopting. Now, traditionalists will say, oh, well, it's not the modern version of the game, 10 on 10. But in fact, when you look at 6s, what I think it could be, I think it could take the best of both box lacrosse and field lacrosse, blend those together on a field. My understanding is it'll be much more up-tempo. You're going to have limited face-offs, more goals, a lot of up and down. For long poles and face-off guys, unfortunately, they may not be able to find a home on a 6s team. But it's also, I think, a great way to be more inclusive in youth lacrosse. So you're a small town in Ontario or Nebraska or Europe or something, and you want to get a team off the ground. The 6s format lends itself really well to that, where you can put together 10, 12 guys or girls, either, and you have a team. They're also trying to, I believe, in the Olympic format, make the men's and women's games as similar as possible, more to standardize. So as much as it seems quite controversial now and some people are upset about it, I think it creates an opportunity to put our best foot forward. As we all know now, with the popularity of video games and short attention spans, sitting to watch an athletic event for 2 hours or 3 hours is just not going to be interesting to this next generation. I understand they're following the rugby sevens model, and that they also want, I'm talking about the Olympic 6s, they want to have more countries able to send teams in. I'm really looking forward to a future where I think 6s might become the dominant game. It's going to take a long while to change the NCAA format away from the 10-man game, but when you think about it, You don't need a hockey arena to play. You just need a field. So it's going to be a lot more accessible, less expensive as well. You can include more people, more countries, more high schools. It'll be lower cost, and I think the game will be more exciting with more of an up-tempo affair, perhaps more like basketball. I've been told that the Sixes games at the high levels will produce scores of 30 to 40. Well, watching 30 to 40 goals in a 1 hour period versus 7 to 8 in a 2 or 3 hour period may be more interesting to the spectator. And but who knows where things will go. It's just quite interesting, the interplay between field and box. Where does that take us? Because now it's no secret that the majority of the highest scoring lacrosse players in the NCAA are all Canadian, right? They mostly box lacrosse players, or many box lacrosse players. They hone their skills over many years with smaller nets and tougher circumstances. So it's no secret that box players convert really well to field lacrosse. So that's a really interesting current trend that I see expanding, and I hope that whether it's a university that wants to lower costs by migrate to a Sixes format, or whether it's a small country that wants to put forward a national team, I think it's a really interesting development in the game.